I call the meeting the September 30th, 2009 meeting of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission. Would you call a roll, please?
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Nocita?
Thanks.
Present.
Commissioner Neely?
Here.
Commissioner Norris? Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Walters?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw? Commissioner Crocker? Chair Slack?
Here. Thank you. Could we go around the room and introduce ourselves, please? Starting with...
Bill Kbeisman, Assistant City Attorney.
Larry Patterson, City Manager.
Nancy Krushauer, City Engineer, Public Works Director.
Ed Darrow, District Development. Randy Taylor, District Development. Lloyd Birdie from Downtown Oregon City. William Becker.
Nancy Ide, City Recorder.
Terry Bankhead, City Manager's Office.
Scott Archer, Community Services Director. David Weber, Finance Director.
And
Yeah.
Oh, Colin Meyer, Oregonian.
Thank you. Thank
not me.
you. We have any citizens' comments? No? Future agenda items? None?
Oh, I have a future agenda
Okay.
items.
Commissioner Nocita.
We had an agenda item before, which was the report of Mr.
Leland.
Leland.
That is scheduled for the 21st of October.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Adoption of agenda. Do we have any reason to make any amendments to the agenda? No? Okay, moving along. Item 5, public hearing A, exemption from public bidding requirement for Cove contract. The staff, Larry Patterson.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is a public hearing and will require an approval of resolution if that is your wishes, and I'm going to have Mr. Kbeisman explain this item to you.
Good evening, Chair Slack, members of the Commission. What you have before you is a draft resolution adopting findings to exempt certain public improvement contracts from competitive bidding. So you know the general rule for all public contracts in the state is that they should be subject to competitive bid, but the state law does and the urban renewal rules allows for exemptions in certain situations. This is also tied to the DDA that you'll be looking at later, which also requires a developer to request this exemption, and that was what led to this. There are two things. One, exempting from competitive bid the construction of certain infrastructure projects, as well as a purchase of concrete from Glacier Northwest. Those are the two things that are going to be that this exemption would exempt from competitive bidding. In order to exempt them, you need to be able to make two findings about this exemption. First, that it's unlikely that the exemption will encourage favoritism in the awarding of public contracts, and second, that the exemption will likely result in substantial cost savings for the agency. The findings put together information as far as favoritism, and that this exemption won't encourage favoritism, that the entity that is being awarded the exemption already has a large project underway immediately adjacent to the project, has unique knowledge and requirements, and in addition has agreed to competitively bid all of those projects. Because there's no diminishment of competition, because the work will be done by this person who is doing the development, and second, will be competitively bid anyway. As far as the concrete, the requirement really stems from the agency's purchase of the property. By buying the concrete from Glacier Northwest, it lowers the price on the overall purchase price. And it wasn't necessarily the result of favoritism, but it happened that the project was going to be built where Glacier Northwest had already owned the property, and they were able to negotiate that in. As far as cost savings, there are a number of identified factors that go into that would indicate substantial cost savings, the unique knowledge of the site, the ability to coordinate, the use of the construction manager general contractor method, the design phase, and a variety of other ones are identified in the resolution. So those are the reasons that the developer has proposed for adopting the exemption, and that's before you tonight. And for your consideration, the state law does require that there be a public hearing for any public who is interested in the exemption to have an opportunity to comment on it. So you can choose to have open the public hearing, or I can answer any questions that I can answer now.
Do we have any questions?
I have one. We've had this agreement on the purchase price of property that Glacier currently owns. Is the stated price that we've agreed on reduced in this process, or has that already been factored into the cost?
That was factored into the property sale as part of it.
How do we determine whether we have market price for the concrete? Just out of curiosity.
I have an answer for that.
Would you state your name and?
Ed Darrow, developer. When we negotiated that contract, it was broken into a couple of items. One was for their leaving the site, so it was a relocation cost. The other was the concrete. The concrete, even though we are to buy it from them, has to be at market rate. And then also we're getting a credit against that market rate, I think at like $5 a yard, that would go to reduce the cost of the $250,000. So there definitely is a cost savings.
Okay, but how do we know that it's market rate? What is their?
When we go out to actually contract for that, we will go out and hit all the other entities in the area.
Okay.
And make sure that it is a market rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Do we need to open a public hearing at this time then?
Yes, you do.
So I just
Essentially,
now open for public comment. Do we have anybody who wanted to speak to the public hearing? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Do we have any discussion on this resolution?
Move to approve the resolution.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the resolution. Do we have discussion?
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
No.
Commissioner Nocita,
No.
Commissioner Neely,
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Walters,
Aye.
Commissioners, and Chair Slack.
Yes. Aye. So that makes, let's see, what do we got? 2, 4, 7? So it was 5-4 and 2 against. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. General business, 6A, revisions to Cove DDA. Larry Patterson, City Manager, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, at your last commission meeting, we considered some revisions to the development agreement, and you had a couple of additional questions. And so going back with Mr. Janik and chatted with him about those, you will see in section 8.7.2 is we have put in the wording that you had indicated. It now reads, the association shall be responsible for the maintenance and repair of the trails, esplanade, and the water resource planning area is shown in Exhibit A, and Track C is shown on attached Exhibit B from the date of substantial completion of the Phase 4 condominiums. The other question you had asked about whether he felt confident that the wording took the maintenance up to Phase 4. He said he thought the wording was clear on that and felt confident with it. Again, if that's a concern, I can ask him again to redraft it, but he felt okay with that. And you had also had a question about the exhibit, and I'll be working with Mr. Darrow, Mr. Tyler, that will make that change of that trail on the peninsula there in the exhibit as well. So again, this is a revision, and I'll need your approval of
Any
that.
questions? Comments? We have a motion.
I was just going to ask if we needed a motion. I move to approve the revisions to the Cove DDA as stated in Section 8.72, and with a future chart coming that will document the trail areas and what else is in it. Is that it?
Mhm.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the red line revisions to the DDA. we have any discussion?
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
No.
Commissioner Nocita,
No.
Commissioner Neely,
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Walters,
Aye.
and Chair Slack.
Aye. Motion carries 5-4, 2 against. Okay. Item 6B, amendments to storefront improvement program purpose and guidelines. We'll just say ditto, Mr. Patterson. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
City manager.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, just take another shot in the dark here at what we're looking for. Again, I think if you look at your downtown urban renewal plan, is you'll find that downtown is listed in there. It is very general in regards to the type of projects, and again, since you're given grants, you have wide discretion in your ability to give that money. So trying to guess exactly what we want here, I've taken another shot at this. I've kind of opened it up some that you may or may not like, but again, I think when you look at downtown with the vast amount of improvements that we need down there, again, I think you probably want to draw that more broadly than you do narrow, because you'll get to a point where you may want to make it a little bit more prescriptive. The question is, when are we there yet? Because there's still a number of improvements, both on storefronts and in some of the surrounding area, including some of the parking areas could definitely look better. So in there, again, attempting to kind of fill that in, we've expanded some of the eligible improvements. Those include landscaping, fences, back racks, sidewalks, and parking lots. I've kind of expanded the visual areas on which those are seen from. I don't think there's any magic there, but it definitely, I think, removes any doubt of whether you can see it. Basically, I think you can see anything from a sidewalk or the street if you want to, but with these, I think there's no question visually, if it's in that corridor, it could qualify for one of these type grants. It also draws a parallel to the design criteria that the Main Street is going to be developing. Those hopefully will fill in some of the blank spots when those are developed, and you can look at those. Again, we'll have to work with that when we get those, because there's some area that's not in the historic downtown that you may want to have a little different approach to, but we need to see what those guidelines are for us. You want some consistency both on 7th Street and other areas. And then it gave you some of the things that you may want to consider, and you'll see those listed there in the resolution as well. There's no magic here. Don't have any pride of authorship. I do think if this is still a area of debate for the commission, you may want to appoint a subcommittee to take this up and develop those, because just kind of guess at what you feel you need to award these grants. So.
But by the way, I understand, or at least understood, that the Main Street guidelines that were coming were to be approved by this body.
Yeah.
They weren't being approved by Main Street and imposed on this body. And I kind of had some question that somebody asked about that, and I want to make that clear.
You have the authority there.
Main Street is coming to this body for the approval. So, what's your pleasure on this topic? Commissioner Smith.
Well, I think at our last meeting, we discussed that this was supposed to be at a work session, and so I don't know why we're not discussing it at a work session. Anyway, I sent out my thoughts regarding the current guidelines and the proposed guidelines by staff, and I'm actually going to go through it because I've stated some of these concerns before, but I think that they need to be addressed. So,
Are there
unless
copies?
we're gonna do this,
Are there copies of these out here that the audience could?
I don't know if there is as well. I won't go through it word for word, but I want to at least point out my concerns. The first concern was in the new proposed guidelines. I shouldn't say new because they're just the proposed guidelines. Is that there's no discussion about the purpose being connected in any way to historic conservation or restoration. And I think there needs to be at least some mention in there that when we're awarding these grants, that some thought is going into, is it bringing back the buildings, especially if it's a historic building, in some way to where it was when it was originally built, rather than just granting awards to make the building look better and kind of destroying the history of downtown. And so I think that's really crucial. Some of the old wording in our current guidelines, I think, were much better. I don't think that this is so much of an issue in looking at some of the other paperwork, but there was a difference between the wording in the grant being applicable for each structure versus any one project. And I think the wording specifying per structure clarifies it a lot clearer than any one project, because it doesn't say what a project is. It doesn't even say that you couldn't ask for multiple projects for any one building. So I have concerns about that. I have concerns about individual properties getting more than one grant, and I also have a problem with any one applicant getting more than one grant, even if it's for multiple buildings. So I think that needs to be thought about a little bit. The actual words eligible improvements were removed, meaning that we can award grants to just anything, regardless of what the criteria says, which means then there's no need for a criteria at all. So I don't even know why we're talking about it. The word priority discretion means that this group can decide absolutely, regardless of the criteria or anything else, who we're going to award grant money to. That concerns me, especially since members of this commission have been awarded grants, do own buildings in downtown, or sell buildings downtown. That seems to be a huge conflict of interest. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the words exterior improvements only being taken out, because it doesn't give any specification to, we're talking about things being seen from the street or from the sidewalk. Well, if we take the words exterior improvements only out, if you can see it from the sidewalk and it's in the building, is that okay? There's just no clarification of any of these points. I question the fact that we have listed that this grant is not, should not be used for non-permanent fixtures. And I believe it shouldn't be used for non-permanent fixtures. So I question whether signs, especially if they're tenant signs, where the business may not be there in a year or 2 years, whether that's a permanent fixture. I question whether awnings are a permanent fixture, especially if the awnings are printed on or there's signs for tenants on those awnings. We have awnings all over Oregon City that refer to businesses that are no longer in those buildings, and there's new businesses in them. Willamette Falls TV awning and the Carriage House Music awning. Those businesses are gone, and there's new businesses in there, but the signs are still there on awnings. So that concerns me. I think that it's something we need to discuss. I think it might be applicable if signs are quoting the historicness, the historic aspects of the building. For if it's a downtown building, and it's historically, for instance, I'm coming up with the Petzold building. If the sign on the top of the Petzold building says Petzold building, and it's always going to be the Petzold building, then I think a sign, that's a permanent sign. And it's going to be there, we would assume, forever. Or if the building talks about this such and such professional building, well, that's going to be there forever. The tenants, however, are not. And we're putting all this into eligible now. I don't really think landscaping is necessarily appropriate, because landscaping is could very well be temporary. Landscaping comes down, and it's only going to look good compared. It's only going to look good if it's maintained. Well, do we know who's maintaining it? If it's a building that the leasee has asked for a grant for, and the leasee doesn't take care of the landscaping, then how do we know that it's going to be alive in a year? Many of the buildings in the urban renewal district don't have property or yards. So does landscaping qualify for, do we qualify flower baskets as landscaping? Do we qualify flower boxes as landscaping? I mean, we have no rhyme or reason to, or definition for what landscaping even means. And I could see that causing all kinds of problems, especially with things like the flower baskets where everyone's trying to figure out who's paying for it. We've added the word, staff's added the word canopies. I think there needs to be a clear definition of what canopies are. To me, canopy is a temporary structure that's freestanding. If it's freestanding, then it shouldn't be part of a storefront grant. If it's temporary, it shouldn't be part of a storefront grant. But it doesn't say what it means, so I'm not really sure why that's there. We've already, even from code enforcement, been talking citywide about getting rid of temporary structures altogether. So how is canopies listed in there? Staff proposed guideline adds fences, bike racks, sidewalks, all of which were originally listed and parking lots, all that were ineligible and now are eligible in this new draft. None of those are necessarily connected to the storefronts. And so I question all of that. I don't believe the urban renewal money should be used to reimburse SDCs. I mean, urban renewal money is money that we've frozen that should be going to city services, and now we're going to use that money that we've frozen that's supposed to go to city services, and we're going to pay the SDCs with them. That doesn't make any sense. I agree that anything within the Main Street district should go through Main Street design criteria. But remember, Main Street goes beyond the Main Street district. Main Street goes into the Cove. So is the Cove development going to adhere to the Main Street downtown designation? So I think that needs to be clarified. I like I said, Main Street design criteria needs to be a part of this, but in no way do I think that the Urban Renewal Commission obviously needs to sign off on those design criteria or be a part of helping create it if we're going to use that as a criteria here. And so that's important. This whole bit about changing improvements not visible, this is talking about ineligible improvements. It says projects or improvements not visible from public streets and sidewalks are ineligible. Okay? Well, the new draft has changed that to improvements not visible from public streets. So sidewalk, okay, the new version, let's see here. The new version actually takes sidewalks out, I believe, and adds roofs, promenade, river, all those different things. Well, I think that's just pointless because the promenade is a city sidewalk. The elevator is a public street. The river has a city sidewalk that runs the entire length of the river. So, you can't see much of downtown from the river, but you can see it from the sidewalk that runs along the river, so that all qualifies still. The wording doesn't have to be changed. It still qualifies all the things that we're talking about. I'm not really sure why it says something visible from a roof. I'm not sure what roof you would be standing on to look out over downtown. So that one I don't know if it fits. It talks about roofs again in the other section, paving projects, parking lots, sidewalks. they should all stay as ineligible. Roofs are not visible from public streets or sidewalks. They don't really have anything to do with the storefront. Parking lots, as far as I'm concerned, are considered part of business operations, which is not eligible. Sidewalks and paving projects, I think we should not be ever awarding grant funds for that. It's hypocritical to expect homeowners and businesses to maintain and repair their own sidewalks when we're giving taxpayer funds to fix someone else's. Makes no sense. Ineligible improvements needs to be clarified, and I think I already said this, that no interior improvements, period. And, you know, just because it's seen from a city street and sidewalk, that doesn't really specify too much because you can see inside of the building from there. Security systems were taken out. Why would we be paying, why would we take that out? Eligible participants, leases, or tenants, I think, well, if a tenant of a building wants to get a storefront grant, they have to have the owner's permission anyway to do that. So why wouldn't the owner be the applicant? The owner should be the applicant. There shouldn't be tenant applications. You know, if the owner wants to work with the tenant and support them and come here to do that, that's ensuring that the owner is committed to what the project is, and it's going to be there for a long period of time. The tenant's not going to do that. Ineligible participants. If you are sitting on this commission, you should be ineligible for this grant. If you're a business partner of a member of this commission, you should not be awarded this grant. If you work for a radio station, or you know that if you work for a radio station, that radio station gives out a prize, that the person that works at the radio station and another family can get a prize. That's exactly what we should be doing here. It doesn't make any sense. So relatives and past members of the Urban Renewal Commission after 2 years of serving should not be eligible. It talks about residential uses. And Doug Neely, Commissioner Neely, sorry, mentioned this, and we discussed it a little bit at the last meeting. It actually says that if the building is primarily used as residential, it's not eligible. Well, if we're talking about taking storefronts downtown and turning the upper parts into condos or doing any use, mixed use, that is probably not a very smart decision, because those buildings should be eligible for storefront grants. The fact that we are going to allow this commission to award grants without any criteria, or have a criteria that states we don't have to use it in order to give a grant, then why are we writing it on paper? Let's just write checks to whoever wants it, because we can decide that amongst us what we feel like anyway on any given day. It actually says that. What the majority feels. Okay? If it fits these 7 things. Okay? Now the amazing thing is these 7 things are written and or, which means it only takes one of these for us to write a check. The one I love is number 3. The grant is necessary to assist with the financing of the project. So if you come to us and say, hey, we need your money to assist us in financing our project, you get the money. I mean, are we for real? Is this for real? Grants should only be awarded if they meet a prescribed identifiable criteria. Nowhere in these 7 elements does it say that the grant needs to be a storefront. It's a storefront grant. Nowhere does it say that the project has to be permanent. It could be gone tomorrow, but you're still, as long as it makes downtown look good, it applies. Nowhere does it say the above project even needs to be attached to a building. This is too broad. It'll open the door to all sorts of grant requests that don't even fit the purpose of the storefront improvement program, because the above list does not even state that fitting the purpose of the grant is applicable in awarding the grant. Let's please have a work session, and I'm not going to ask for this again, where we can discuss as a group and nobody else what these criteria are going to be, how we are going to award the grants, and not award another grant until we figure it out. Because if we don't do that, I am going to abstain for every grant from here on out, on every single one for the next, I don't care how many years, until we figure this out. It's embarrassing. It is truly embarrassing.
Anybody else have anything?
Well, no, I think many of the points there Commissioner Smith puts forward, I think, are legitimate things that we need to talk about, and I think we need a focused work session on this topic and this topic alone. Might recommend that I always get her hyphenated name wrong, but Christine Gardner Robinson, or Gardner Robinson's correct. Okay, that she be here for that. I would suggest maybe extend. If you said our group alone, but I would perhaps like to see if you're amenable to have members of the Historic Review Board here
Absolutely.
as well.
Anything else? I do want to make one comment, because I do think a lot of things that you say are overstated as far as the looseness here, far overstated. I'm happy to have a work session. Well, there's one thing that I think some of us fail to think about. This group of people here are leaders, chosen in various ways of this city, and leaders make decisions without having everything in a box. Now, if you're used to having it in a box, I don't think that's leadership, personally. And the other thing is if you're going to say that nobody who owns a building downtown or owns a business downtown or is related can have any benefit from urban renewal, those are the folks that are bringing the excitement to the city downtown.
If they sit on this commission. This commission.
I don't care. The people that sit on this commission come with enthusiasm for turning our downtown around.
I would be enthused, too, if I got a check for $10,000 from the city.
Hey, do you realize that there's a lot more investment than $10,000? It's a measly investment compared to what most of these folks have made. And they've been people that have rolled their sleeves up. They've given time. They've given money. They've given emotions to making something happen downtown. And I think they have a right to sit on the commission. I think they have a right to benefit like any other citizen does.
I agree with the chair, but I think this should be one of the major points that we discuss at the work session.
That's fine.
We had a case where at the city commission level, where actually I sat out, I left the room, where a contract was awarded to a company that is owned by my son. I'm actually an officer of that company. If we applied that across the board, I think, and I don't think any decisions that were rendered by this body. I don't think anybody on the commission actually knew that the company in question. I was an officer in it. I purposely did not divulge why I was going out, because I didn't want anybody to know that they were dealing with that kind of situation. And I think this is generally true, that the obligation that comes forward is for any individual that in fact has those kind of interests excuses himself from the process, which, as far as I know, is what has happened. I think we ought to discuss it. I think you've got a lot of strong points there, and I don't mind being called Doug, incidentally. But you got a lot of strong points there. I think if you looked probably at most processes and so forth, we wanted the representation actually from the downtown 7th Street corridor on this body, And if in fact that representation is going to result in people that are actually excited about doing things and so forth, not coming on the committee because they are excited about doing things, I think it would be highly restrictive. But I think there's a whole other series of comments that you have there that we need to really look at. So I'd like to pull back from something that is involving us personally and deal with actually the details and the questions of the other items that you brought forward.
Commissioner West, do you have something?
Yeah, I kind of concur with Doug on the, if you're on this board and it's your building getting some money, because every time in the last 3 years, everyone recuses themselves and they do not vote on it. So I'm in agreement with Commissioner Neely that should not be a requirement of sitting on this board or any other one, and you just excuse yourself because you want to give incentives to people that are doing the work, and that's the whole point of this, is to incentivize renovation and in our downtown area. I'm not sure why you think we need to have the Historic Review Board here tonight. Downtown is not a historic district. There's maybe, 5 buildings downtown that are, one building downtown that's on the National Historic District, so that building has its own requirements, and our Main Street guidelines will be here. I could see if you having Main Street here because they are, they're the criteria that we had agreed to have. So if any building, is historic on it, then it can go through that process in addition. But as a broad sweeping thing, I don't know why they need to be here.
Commissioner Neely?
Yeah, if I might. We frequently get recommendations from Christine Gardner Robinson in terms of what we should do and what we do not do. The reason that there are no buildings is that at the time this was done, there was a strong lobby in terms of getting properties on the local inventory. There's a strong lobbying effort to keep the commercial section out of it, and they would someday deal with it on their own. They never did so. So the only mechanism that existed for a building coming onto the register was on the National Register, not on the local inventory. Only in the whole city, the only commercial ones that will be those that came on the National Register. All of our local inventory are of residential housing. I'm suggesting input on the question. I do think it's a legitimate question to determine in terms of levels of priority of awarding grants, and we're getting a lot of grant applications. In terms of the order of priority, we've been awarding them on a as-come basis. It is clear, at least at this point in our funding, that we would not be able to fund all of the applicants that would want to come in a yearly basis. I think we have to have things that are included in the decision process that enables us to prioritize, and one of those pieces might be the historical renovation of a building. I'm not saying that we are.
Yes, as an incentive, I like that.
Yeah, and so the point is, there are just so many things that I think need to be discussed at a work session. That was the reason I actually was suggesting that we have members of the Historic Review Board coming in, not that they would act in their governing at any point in the governing process to make decisions on the grant awards, but they may well provide input in terms of not requirements, but things that we could consider in the prioritization of the award of the grants.
They usually do.
Well, I agree with that. In fact, I have long wished that we had a way to give more money to people who are going to historically do the right thing. Mm-hmm. That more money ends up being a lot of money in most cases. But I had hoped, and we've talked at Main Street about finding other sources of funds to assist in those kinds of ways. But so are we settled that we'll do this in a work session?
Yeah. Can I add one more point or not?
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I think is adding to this confusion of the process for Commissioner Smith is that grants come in one at a time and we award them, and then at the end of the year, now we've spent just about our whole year's grant money, you can kind of look back and see what you have given them for and wish you maybe would have rearranged them different. And I'll just throw this out there, and I don't know if it's a good idea or bad, but I wonder if we could set this whole committee up how we do, like how we do our OCCIT grants or our Metro Enhancement grants. So let's say we save all the grants, the awards come in, or not the awards, the applications come in, and maybe, let's say, twice a year, so we don't slow business down too much. Then we have a chance to go through the batch, and then maybe those criteria will sort out easier for you, rather than looking at them one at a time. So when you see 10 applications for 5,
I think at this point in time, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think these ideas ought to be, if we're going to do a work session.
Yeah, we've already had the work session.
Let's spend
we haven't.
let's spend the time to do that, if that's what we all want.
So we're going to redo this screen.
Mr. Patterson.
A lot of these sound like very good ideas, and I know some of the criticisms sound like they're very solid. There's reasons why it's here and things you'll have to think through. I understand, in fact, that was one of my thoughts when we began to draft this, is could you do that? The problem is an individual's construction schedule doesn't happen like that. And if they can't secure the financing up front, that project may not get done. And so it's a little different than the grant process. So as you go through and you talk to these things, you may want to talk about what the ramification of some of this means. If you, again, that's why I think you want discretion. If you tie the purpose back to historical renovations, then anything that's not a historical renovation cannot get funded, and about half of what we've done there probably wouldn't be funded right now. So, sounds good goal, and again, as long as you've got discretion, I think you may want to factor that in, but how you do that, you could have some other ramification that you're not looking for that comes back.
I think it's a point of discussion.
Yep.
I was not suggesting that would be the requirement.
I understand.
But I think, particularly given the amount of low funding that we've been putting in the downtown area and the demands, we do have to come up with a basis of actually rating these things.
Sure.
As opposed to.
And I'm not
Yeah.
taking it. You just have to be careful what you wish for here, because you're
Well,
liable to have
if we're going to do this in a work session, could we?
Yep.
Do we need
Nope.
Commissioner Smith?
I will just say one last thing. I'm not confused, by the way. I'm actually. We do this actually the same way as we do the Oregon City Metro and Oregon City Civic Improvement Fund and the Metro Enhancement, which is why we're meeting on October 5th or whenever in October to redo those criteria, because we haven't used those either. And we're going to meet, of course, as this group is going to meet to discuss the criteria after we've given all our money away. So we do it much the same way, Daphne. And I'm not through. I never anticipated these comments to be implied as the set law, and I don't, but for any reason, think that everything would apply to historic buildings. My point is that we haven't discussed these. Okay, these need to be discussed, but we aren't allowed to discuss those because we haven't yet. After 3 or 4 meetings of asking for a work session, we haven't had it. And we keep pushing it down the pike. So that's the whole point. We have to discuss these.
I was just
we
going to
haven't
ask
had
what
that
the date,
opportunity.
What's the date of the work session?
And thanks for cutting me off again.
Let me first clarify something. Is anytime there's an item on your agenda, it is an opportunity to discuss that item. You
And
do not have to
I've
take
been
action.
cut off now 3 times.
But I'll have to get a date. I mean, I think all of you have kind of seen the list, and again, that's just the list out of the last 6 meetings. So try, and I don't, the Urban Renewal Commission hadn't had the pleasure of looking at the next work session that the City Commission's faced with, but we're gonna have to kind of figure out some timing, and again, hopefully we can get to making some decisions on issues, because they just keep stacking on top of one another. But I'll get you a date, and I can email that out to everyone when it will be.
Commissioner Neely.
We've got time to work this out, because we're not awarding any more money for the rest of the
Yeah,
fiscal
we've
year.
got- we've got
I mean, so,
all the
I mean, we've got the opportunity to have some good work sessions to deal with this issue. We're not, because we're not awarding any more money.
Right.
Yeah, and again, it's not too that your money's all gone, because each year you budget a new amount to that, and actually you
Yep.
have a large amount of money to spend in downtown if the plan works and you have the increment to create that. So.
Commissioner West, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, the Main Street guidelines won't be done for a couple of months, so we could probably put this off till after the first of the year.
Well, I don't suggest that at all. I think it's important.
I think it's important, too.
I would recommend again,
Well, whenever you got to wait for that anyway, so.
I would recommend again, before the work session, you may want to appoint a subcommittee at least to identify the issues that you want to work through and concerns or any desires that you want to see.
Commissioner Smith.
We have been asked by staff 2 weeks ago to submit our comments, and Nancy Crushhour sent me an email saying I was the only one that sent any in so far.
That's correct.
Commissioner Walters.
Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into this, and I have some ideas about what I'd like to see, but I am also waiting for the design criteria, because I think that's an important part of what we need to evaluate when we're looking at these grants, and I do agree that, it's clear we need to prioritize. I think we have time, because we probably won't be awarding anything for at least until we have some funds available. So I don't have any problem waiting on it, and I'd be glad to forward my suggestions, mainly just for creating some kind of a score sheet with the criteria. But the criteria does need to be discussed, and I was actually surprised to see this come up on the agenda tonight, because I didn't feel that we had any forward movement on it enough to have any discussion tonight. So. But good discussion anyway.
So we'll, I'm hearing that we should wait for design criteria from Main Street. Is everybody in agreement with that? You're not in agreement with that.
Well,
Do we want to do you want to do a subcommittee?
Yes.
Who would like to chair that subcommittee?
I would like to suggest that Commissioner Smith chair it.
Okay.
Because of the good work he's put into it. I would certainly.
Thanks a lot.
I would certainly.
Yes, there you go.
If he were the chair, I would certainly participate on the subcommittee. I don't necessarily think that we have to wait for the design guidelines from Main Street. I'm looking forward to them. There are issues that Commissioner Smith has raised other than specific design guidelines that certainly can have thought put to them prior to the guidelines
Would
being
you like to
issued.
be on that
Sure.
committee? Who else?
I'd like to recommend, if it's okay with the body, that we invite the Historic Review Board to select somebody from that board to serve on the committee as well.
How do you feel about that?
That's fine.
Anybody have any objections?
Well, I don't see once again, I'm sorry, I don't see the purpose. If it's a historic building, it goes through the process, so I don't see why they have to be on this committee. And do they want to be on it?
Excuse me. It isn't a case that they are on the local register. It is a case that they can come up with suggestions as to what might be considered criteria for the kinds of priorities that might be awarded.
And all of the buildings downtown are historic. Well, not all of them, but the majority of them are historic, even if they're not on the register.
Okay, then we have a subcommittee. Do you need more than 2 members? Anybody else?
Well, you'll
would
have
like
3.
to-
With it.
Well,
Sure,
the
yeah.
historic, okay.
That's fine.
All right. Anything else on that topic? Okay, let's move on with the item 6C, budget projections related to storefront grant program, downtown businesses during bridge restoration and sale of houses on Tumwater.
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
Bass.
Chair, members of the board, the Urban Renewal Commission has asked a few questions that relate to really kind of where we're at budgetarily. They've asked about perhaps additional funding for the storefront grants. They've inquired about the ability to provide assistance to downtown doing a bridge restoration program, even though we haven't identified any program there exactly how to do that. And we've also talked about the flexibility of selling the houses in Tumwater. And I just wanted to kind of address some of those questions and, again, answer any questions you have. You should have a copy of a spreadsheet that deals with the Cove project only, September 2009, the concept with apartments and land improvements only. Hopefully you have that at your place this evening. Good. I'm going to walk you through this and kind of talk about it, and it's really a question of how much risk that you want to take on, and I would caution you right now until things kind of settle out, is to proceed with caution, but I don't want to say that there's not some money to do some things with, but I do think we have to kind of, I'll give you some of the caveats here and show you what's here. Just looking at the spreadsheet, so to kind of orient you to this real quickly, if you'll look up at the top, first you'll see it says resources, and then next is the uses, debt service requirements, debt service reserves, total uses, and then you have your beginning available balance and ending balance, and then there's some information at the bottom that has to do with debt coverage ratios. Also, if you go across, you'll see a column that says total, and that's the total amount that will be spent between our revenues generated between 2009 and 2021. And then you have the various fiscal years that each one comes due in. Looking at this, let me just point out a couple of those line items. I think most of them are fairly self-explanatory, but just to kind of go through that, what this is anticipating is that we have already issued in 2008, 2009, $10 million worth of debt. We are anticipating doing that again this year that we're in. We're looking at establishing a line of credit, again, to fund the Phase 1 and Phase 2 improvements of the Cove, and then converting that to a bonded debt, which will carry a little lower rate, and we anticipate doing that in 2010, 2011. That really is going to be dependent upon how well the district does. You'll also look at the property tax line, excluding the Cove. Mr. Parks has put that together, anticipating between 4 and a 4.5% increase in assessed values. And there is the first caveat I'll mention. First of all, historically, we've been doing better than that. With a downturn in the economy this last year, I think we were at 4.25%. So one of the things you might want to look at there is, and the first guess is it going to be better than that? If so, you'll probably have a little bit more money. Should it turn worse than that, you may have a little less, and that there, and you get in the kind of that bottom line to look at. So that's one of the caveats that you want to be a little cautious on as we proceed here through the next couple of years to see how this thing is going to shake itself out. You'll also see the increment from the Cove project, that beginning in 2012, and again, this is just assuming the apartments and the land only, because those are the pieces we know that are coming out of the ground. The condos are a little iffier proposition at this point until we see those come together. The uses are next, and that's the projects that we have underway at the present time, which includes the Amtrak station, McLaughlin Boulevard, the Bluff Promenade, the City Hall, and then the grant loan, which are budgeted in there at $110,000 per year, and then professional services. One of the things you will need to, again, proceed cautiously, and we're going to know this, or most of these here in short order, is are those projects going to come in on budget, or are we going to have any cost overruns? The one I think for sure was probably going to be under what is anticipated here is City Hall. I think we're going to be under the 5.6, but we should know that here in the next couple of months. McLaughlin Boulevard, Amtrak, I'm fairly confident we're going to be at the 1.5, but you know, that's another thing that we kind of have to watch and kind of see how that shakes out as well. And then the Cove, there's a limit on that. We know that'll be in there at 10,000. That's what the DDA calls for. You'll see the cost of your bonded debt. That's listed there. And so when you get down to the bottom line, the part that you need to look at there is the ending available balance. And Mr. Park said he tried to run this out to ensure that you had no year in which you had your ending available balance under $600,000, and he's accomplished that, and he shows that you have at least $500,000 with this scenario available for additional projects beginning in the year 2016. If you'll look at those ending available balances, yeah, there's probably 100,000, 200,000, maybe 300,000, depending how low you want to fly, that would be available to do that. Of course, when you start spending it, that begins to draw that subsequent year down somewhat. But there again, depending on what happens with the assessed value increases, depending on what happens with the actual assessed value of the project when it comes in, depending on what happens in regards to these projects, is, you know, are you going to have some additional money or not? probably going to have a few dollars there. Big expenditures are probably going to be somewhat limited, but, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, you probably could squeeze that out of it, but I think you want to be somewhat cautious. The more commitments we take on, too, especially as we go through this period of looking at debt funding, is, of course, any debt issuance company is going to look at that, and if they feel we're overextended, our chances of getting that debt funding is going to be restricted. So, again, I tend to be a little bit conservative when I'm looking at these things because you want to make sure that you don't end up there with a year where you're going in a deficit because there's no other place to go get it. So that's part of that. So I just want to give you a picture of that. It's really a question of just how much risk you want to take on, or really how much you want to roll the dice and see there. In regards to the sale of the houses in Tumwater, you can sell those. Those proceeds would go back into the Urban Renewal Fund. The plan that you have calls for improvements at the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, so you could spend those dollars on improvements there. The plan does not mention operations, so I'm not sure that could be used for operations in that. In fact, I think you'd probably have a limitation in that regard. I do think, though, that you could probably use the rental monies that are coming off of those, and you could probably transfer those in a way, and there's a couple of different mechanisms you could use to do that. Those are not a lot. You'll also see, though, that those rental monies are factored in this scenario, so if you reduce that, that, again, is spending some of those dollars. But I think you have that type of flexibility if you chose to do that. So just a quick look at kind of where we're at with things right now, and again, with a fairly conservative eye directed at that for the most part.
Commissioner Nocita.
Question for Mr. Patterson regarding the line of credit and the bonds. You mentioned that the bonds carry lower interest rates than a line of credit. So my question would be is why aren't we just going after the bond right away?
Probably, given what we've taken on here, you couldn't bond $10 million right now.
Why?
Just don't have enough capacity in the urban renewal district, and so therefore we're running that out over time with this scenario, and that's what we're doing. I think they'll give us a line of credit under that because of higher risk, but it probably couldn't get the bonded debt right now. We'll have those discussions with them, but I don't think the bonding companies will look at bonded debt at the present time.
But if that's the case, what is it about next year, what is it about 2011 that would give us the capacity to issue a bond that we don't have in 2010?
Well, you have additional growth in assessed value at that time, what this is assuming. Again, as I indicated before, that may stretch out some. We may have to ride with that line of credit a little longer. It really depends on when when the bond companies feel we can do that. Again, we'll have that discussion up front. I think they're probably, at least with the discussions we've had before with the banks, is they were comfortable with a line of credit, wasn't comfortable much with the bond issuance, but if we could do that, we'll do it sooner, or at the earliest possible date.
Commissioner West was next.
I'd hate to see us. I'd hate to see us sell those houses at a loss right now. So unless we seriously, or there was no other way to bridge whatever funds we needed or prioritize. That's my. I'd rather wait until they're.
I'm sorry.
I was really following off on Commissioner Nocita's question there. I assume one of the things that if the coal project advances and so forth, and we actually then have greater assessed value from that, was that one of the things that you thought would enable us to actually start bonding?
Yeah, you have two things. You have the Cove project, if you recall the DDA, we're actually start breaking ground on that, and I think they need to see that coming out of the ground, as well as you have another year's growth in your assessed value. Normally what happens with urban renewal, and this is why we're looking at the line of credit, and it's a little different scenario, you go and you get bonding based on the assessed value you have. In this case, to ask them to bond on the Cove. Again, the Cove is not coming out of the ground yet, so they're not looking at that. Now, again, this time next year, you're going to have those apartments coming out of the ground, so it's going to be, you're going to have some increase in assessed value just normally with other things we're doing in the district, as well as you're going to have a project that's beginning to take shape. So it gives them a little bit more security.
Yep. Commissioner Nocita.
Okay, some more questions now as I think of these. The resources part of the spreadsheet, beginning the year 2012, there's a listing for the increment provided by the Cove project, beginning with, is this in thousands? Is that 400?
414,000, yes.
400. So each number on this chart should have
Three more
three
zeros.
zeros.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is, too, based on, I think, a projected value of the apartments and land improvements at $31,900,000.
So this is only for the apartments.
Only for the
That
apartments.
whole
and the
line
land
item is
improvements.
just for the apartments.
Correct.
Why isn't the tax increment from the office and condos being factored into this?
Well, because I'm not sure that, again, this is a very conservative estimate. I can give you one that factors that in, but again, as you recall, those are out in the future, and they have to buy those down. I can't guarantee today, as I sit here, that happens. Again, Mr. Janik went through that as some of the risks, and so I didn't want to give you a picture that showed this is all rosy, when in fact, I think you have to base your expenditures right now on a worst-case scenario, and that's kind of what this picture's for you. And it could be a little worse if your assessed value growth really fell off in the district. So again, just trying to give you a feel for a worst-case scenario. I think is going to be better than this, and that's why I talked about one of the factors that you probably won't see is what's happening to that assessed value. If we continue to grow as we have historically in the 6 and 7% bracket, you're definitely going to have some additional money. This is ratcheted down at 4 and 4.5%. So, again, just a look based on a number of assumptions.
Okay. The other question I have, it goes down to uses, and I think I raised this during our budget committee meetings also because I thought the figure was mind-blowing, and I still think it's mind-blowing, and that's the professional services line. If we add 3 zeros to each one of these line items, then the total for professional services is $6 million?
Yes.
600. Where's that going? I just can't comprehend.
10-year cumulative?
Well, it goes in several areas, and again, I think you may have this ratcheted down a little lower than what it may take to do. That accounts for some of the funding for staff time that is directed towards urban renewal. Again, we cost back my time, Dave's time, back to urban renewal. There is some time that we have taken out because of these exact type conversations that ought to be being charged. Ms. Crushhour and her staff, which are running all the projects for urban renewal, we're not charging those times that should be being charged to urban renewal. In addition to that, you have consulting fees, you have legal fees, and you have any other types of cost, paper, printing, meeting cost, all of the administrative costs associated with this program. And again, you're looking at a $32 million program, or excuse me, that's just project activity in here. So that's what those costs are going for. So overall, that's
Well, you say
not all that much.
that staff time, like Ms. Crosshauer, is not being charged to urban renewal
That's correct,
currently,
currently.
and we are going to begin charging that time to urban renewal.
Probably not right away. We need to get there. I think that's a full cost recovery. We haven't done it in the past. Again, that took place because of past discussions at the Urban Renewal Commission where folks were upset that that kind of time being charged. But if you're really going to get the full cost accounting, you have to charge back the time that's actually being devoted to those type of projects.
Okay, so I guess I'm less clear than ever now because it seems that this number being so large might have an explanation if we were billing your time and Ms. Crosshauer's time.
Well,
miserable.
we are billing a number of staff people's time that are devoted. We're not, at least in my thinking, it ought to be charged more. But I think you've got some of the issues throughout the whole budget like that where we need to get into more cost. Now, part of that too is administrative cost just to keep track of all that time, and that's some of the reason why it hadn't been done because that's a capacity issue within the city.
All right. Fiscal year 2009, I guess, ended in July, ended at the end of June. So
End of June, 1st of July.
So this $1,128,000 on this spreadsheet is money that was spent in fiscal year 2009. And
0809.
it's already been spent.
Yeah.
This $1,128,000.
Correct.
Okay. I would like to move to request of the city manager a breakdown of what this $1,128,000 was spent on in the fiscal year 2009. I'd really be interested in getting a breakdown of that funding.
Do we need
Yeah.
a motion or just a request?
I'll bring it back out. Actually, I've provided that once, but I'll do it again. So,
You have provided it?
yeah, but I'll get it again for you.
Okay.
At the next
by,
meeting.
by email is fine. I'd just like
Okay,
to see exactly what that was spent on.
I mean, a motion if you feel that way, but I think we can just request that.
No, if he's had it and has provided to us, I don't recall it, but my memory is notoriously fickle.
Lots of numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just one more follow-up, if I can, in terms of the professional services. When you're putting this number forward, I presume it's looking forward at, in fact, charging the time back.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we think that's falling off, again, you can see under this scenario, is once we get past or get the cove going, is because where the dollar's at, the activity in urban renewal is going to drop off some. Now, if the projects pick up, those costs will pick back up, and that's why you go back to 08, 09, we had a lot of activity going in the urban renewal area. So.
And this, I believe, I'm going back to my previous time on the commission, but we had the Hilltop, I do believe that you had a staff member whose time who was strictly charged to the urban renewal district. Is that not true?
I don't recall strictly, but I think a portion. Actually, when I started working here, I was an urban renewal project manager, and at that time, my time was fully charged to urban renewal. And then as I got more into public works, it backed off considerably. And then when Sharon Zimmerman was here
That's
working
what
on-
I was thinking.
I think maybe she was, perhaps David could check this better, but she might have been at
Just-
30% or something like that.
But that's all fallen out, then, I take it. I mean, you
Right.
go out of the public works for, I presume, fiscal reasons, but I think it is important we go back that direction.
I think so, too. I think there's a lot of that needs to be done, and this is just one of the areas in the budget where we need to look at it. It gets confusing, and it is an administrative, and a burden administratively to keep track of all that, but I think it gives you a better chance of full cost accounting, and I think some of the things that we see coming up is folks never quite account the fact that when we assign staff people here, they're not doing this, and there's a cost for them doing that, because that's where their time's being spent.
Anything else? Is that complete your report?
Yeah, again, just kind of give you a look. So whether you want to look at those things you've talked about, that kind of, it's really a question of, do you think these assumptions will be better, or do you want to fly a little lower? And that's a gut check call on the part of the Urban Renewal Commission there. So.
Well,
Commissioner West.
I want to be conservative in our dealings, that's for sure, so.
Yeah, well, I would caution, at least for the next several months, that we just kind of see how some of these things shake out, and that will kind of give us a better feel for really how we're going to end up here. So.
It's a
Commissioner
different item I didn't know how to deal with in terms of a study session and a future agenda item, if I might.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is the appropriate forum or if it's a city commission thing. We've been seeing more and more articles in the paper about what may happen to Amtrak in terms of a route chosen. In fact, the Oregon City News actually covered it at the time we actually passed the purchase of the freight station. I would, if we can, I would like to have the appropriate people at ODOT address us. I would actually, if we can get some representatives from Union Pacific to come, because I get very confused by reading the newspaper of who's for what. It's rather confusing. But I think we might hit a position where we might be wanting to be involved in a lobbying effort on our own. But we're going to have a lot of information before we do that. I don't know the best mechanism to do this, but I think we need to do so.
Yeah. Let me give you a quick overview of what that issue is about, and I think most of you are probably aware, and I did send you an email kind of talking about some of this. is the state has begun to look at the high-speed rail, and there's really a debate on whether that should be along the Union Pacific rail line or the Oregon Electric. Oregon Electric has some pluses in the fact that it doesn't have as much freight movement and other thing moving along it, so they feel they could do that. We met, we being Nancy Crushauer and I met with Steve Bryant, who is with Oregon Solutions, who were looking into this issue, and he was just asking some questions about Oregon City's feeling about a number of different issues that were raised. We kind of anticipated we'd get a little bit more feedback because this seemed there's a big process that's going to have to be gone through that really was going to have quite a public involvement component. We were a little surprised here about a week ago that there was a group that wanted to meet, mostly comprised of cities along the Oregon Electric line, that were talking about a report that's been issued, which I think is a draft report from Parsons Brinkerhoff that kind of indicates that the Oregon Electric line is the line of choice. I can say I think my general feeling from the folks that were at that meeting from cities along the Oregon Electric line really do not want to see that come down that line. And so when they get back through a NEPA process, I think there's going to be a big issue that's probably going to be looking at maybe that's not the line of choice, at least in terms of feelings. There's a number of things that were left out, too. I don't think there was a good analysis of that as it relates to land use, particularly, Oregon City Regional Center, and if you're going to tie policies together, that would make some sense as well. Whether Oregon City would say we want it to run down the Union Pacific line or not, I think is something we need to wait and see. There's a lot that has to be answered. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be developed. What are the impacts? How are those going to be addressed? Again, if you're talking about a high-speed rail coming through the center of your town, what does that mean? So all of those issues still have to be addressed. We didn't want to say we're not interested, but what we basically took a very neutral position that, here are some of the policies we think you need to tie back together, and particularly if you're going to designate Oregon City as a regional center, maybe you ought to think about that's where the train connects, but we'd like to know how that's done because of the impact. So there's still a lot of discussion, and the reality is, as fast as everything else moves, no pun intended here, our investment's probably going to be good because by the time they get there, those facilities are going to be dilapidated.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing that we need to continue to look at because it really, that rail has impact on how we're going to how downtown can develop as far as residential is concerned. And so I'm not sure what my answer might be, Ms. Crushauer.
There's also the planning that's been done in the past had identified the UPR line for high-speed rail even after Amtrak, as Amtrak got bigger, faster trains. So that has to be kind of wrestled with, like, well, who's making these changes in plans? But there would be a very major environmental impact study kind of process that everyone could participate in. We also left it at, and we brought up, Larry and I brought up, well, maybe we look at more advanced and modern technology for a high-speed rail line, like tunneling. I mean, like what? Tunneling. They do that in other countries and in other parts of the United States. And how much service can you get out of one rail line, and when does it become way appropriate from a financial standpoint to make a larger investment for a better system? So those are conversations that have not occurred that we've been involved in.
Larger investment in this discussion is only a degree of relativity.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking maybe not even tunneling, but there are things that could make rail going through Oregon City better, even short of tunneling. Tunneling would be great, but
right.
There
And those really, there's alternatives that
Right.
need to be looked at. There
but I
needs
mean,
to
we
be
certainly would
alternatives
want
analysis.
we'd want some pluses along the way if that happened, I think, is what I'm saying. So.
Yeah, and one thing we did leave it at, I just got a voicemail for the next meeting of this group that met, which basically is Clackamas County cities that may be impacted by the rail. And they're trying to set up a meeting with ODOT Rail and probably getting the Department of Transportation Director so that they can give us an update, they can be updated, they can have some conversation. And then we also were talking about what it would make sense to bring some electeds together with the ODOT officials and to make sure that everybody's in communication on it. So we are looking at finding an opportunity that would enable us to engage, whether it be the Urban Renewal Commission or the City Commission or others, in a conversation. We can continue to update you on how that evolves, if that's okay.
Thank you. A great question. Do you have a city manager's report?
I do not.
If we have nothing else, then we're adjourned.